How's it going, everybody? Welcome to General Hospital Envy, my GA chapter show. Let's get into it. A new storyline is unfolding with Curtis Ashford. After a date night with Portia, she asks him a little bit about his family history. We've already kind of known the gist of it. Curtis and Thomas's dad died, and then their mom was too sick with grief to raise them, so Aunt Stella stepped in and raised them on her own, giving up the love of her life, Marcus. However, it turns out that the news of Curtis and Thomas's dad's death might have been greatly exaggerated. A man shows up at the Savoy, spying on Curtis and chatting up his bartender Nanika about live music in the venue. When Nanika goes up to Curtis to tell him about that man and to try and introduce him to him, the man is gone. It turns out he goes over to the hospital to get his feels out on TJ. Basically, he fakes stomach pains and gets TJ to check him out, and they have a conversation about the importance of family, which seems to affect this man in a very emotional way. TJ leaves the room for a moment, but by the time he gets back, the man is gone. Now, it's clear to me that this man is most likely Curtis's father, but I have questions, like, for instance, where has he been all of this time? Did his mom know that he was still alive? Does Stella know that he's still alive? What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Now, funny enough, this isn't the only long-lost parent that the show has shone a light on this week. This week, Terry gets a call from Jeff Weber. Not that we hear it, but she does inform Elizabeth that Jeff contacted her. Basically, what he told her was that he left Elizabeth a voicemail when Franco died, but she never responded to it. Now, it's very obvious that Elizabeth definitely holds some resentment towards her father, and it probably has something to do with the fact that we've not seen them interact at all, ever, in the 25 years that we've known Elizabeth Weber. Now listen, y'all know that I would be more than happy to have Elizabeth interact with at least one of her parents, but the problem is they have dangled Jeff Weber in our face so many times the last few years that I just don't think it's going to happen. When Hayden was revealed to be Elizabeth's sister, they mentioned it back then, and then when Terry came to town, they mentioned it again, and when Elizabeth and Franco were getting married, they mentioned it then, and when Franco died, yes, we actually did see that Jeff left her a voicemail back then. And I just refuse to be fooled for a fifth time, okay? Fool me once and all of that. I can't do it again. If y'all aren't gonna bring us MacGyver or at least a recast, then stop mentioning him. I'm tired. I can't do it anymore. At this rate, it seems more likely that we will see Finn and Elizabeth become 10 times over champions of the GH Trivia Night before we see Jeff. Alright, let's talk about Austin. Remember how I was saying that Olivia seemed to be receptive over the possibility that Leo has autism? Turns out I was way off base. In fact, she is taking a swan dive into that body of water that we know as denial. It seems that Liv would sooner divorce Ned than think that there is any possibility that there is something wrong with Leo. Even though there was another doctor besides Austin that told Olivia that there seems something off with her son. Now, Austin is still suspended from the hospital due to Brooklyn's little scheme, and the only way she's willing to drop that lawsuit against him is if he signs away any potential claim he has to ELQ. And after Austin had a conversation with Monica about her experience trying to fight for a place in the family and the overall family's mentality when it comes to their business, it seems like Austin was like, yeah, you know what, this doesn't seem like it's worth the trouble. He then goes to the Quartermaine Mansion and actually signs away his claims to ELQ. Although, he makes it very clear to Brooklyn that this is not over. I don't know what that means, but I'm intrigued. It almost feels like Austin's just lonely and just wants to have a family of his own, because he really doesn't seem to, right? What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Now, Michael has his own scheme going on the side that has to do with a completely different situation. As you guys know, Michael and Willow have been debating if Nina should have a role in Wiley's life, and they seem to be on the same page, or at least so Willow thought. Michael invited over the DA of rural Pennsylvania and offered him a high-profile case to up his image. That case being Nina Reeves and identity fraud. Willow was not too happy about that one. I'm honestly convinced that Willow thought that Michael was all sunshine and rainbows, but now she's seeing a cold side of him that she doesn't like. Basically, this was Michael's underhanded way of having to not bring Nina to court over visitation for Wiley, but instead having her go to court for a crime that she actually committed, which in turn would affect the visitations with Wiley. I mean, in all honesty, it is a good idea. She should have to pay for what she did, but Willow was not too happy about it. And something tells me Sunny won't be thrilled about it either. Sunny and Nina had to interact this week because they both approached Ava to try and buy Charlie's for Phyllis, just minutes after each other. And so Ava was like, you guys need to talk it out on your own. Sunny and Nina sit down to have a conversation about what would be the best way to approach Phyllis with this offer, and then Nina brings up that she's surprised that Carly hasn't reamed her out for their relationship relationship, and Sonny mentions that he hasn't mentioned it to her because he's just trying to pick up the pieces with Carly and move on. Nina promises that Carly's not going to learn the truth about their relationship from her, so I guess things are good for now. Needless to say, before they could even finish their conversation, in walks 2 police officers that I'm assuming are probably from Pennsylvania, and they place Nina under arrest for identity theft, and Sonny is shocked. In all honesty, I think that regardless of what Sonny thinks of Nina, whether he's still in love with her or whether he's over her, I don't think he would be too pleased to have someone else make the decision to have her arrested, you know? Alright, now let's talk about the situation in Greece. After a hilarious meeting of the minds in Port Charles between Jason, Spinelli, Britt, and Scotty, they discover that Scotty's computer was hacked, and Spinelli traced it all the way to Greece, and of course everyone knows that Greece means Cassadines are probably involved. Later, Britt and Jason track Nick down at the Savoy and ask him about the connection to that specific location in Greece, and if there is a Cassadine connection, and he informs them that there was a compound that the Cassadines used to own that has been since turned into a winery. So with that, Jason and Britt make their way to Greece. Now before they get there, all hell had already broken loose. Much like I predicted last week, Peter managed to get the upper hand on Victor by turning his men against him by bribing them with money, but surely the Cassadines have more money than Peter. Didn't the show already establish that Peter approached Victor due to his money and connections? This story is a mess, I swear to God. Now meanwhile, Drew is begging Liesl to try and find a way for him to not get controlled by Peter again, but the only thing that she could really give him was advice to focus on his kid and keep that at the center of his mind. And for a moment, it actually seemed that it might have worked, because when the WSB started to infiltrate the compound, Peter went into Drew's room and Drew actually attacked Peter. Next thing we see is Drew, who is now fully clothed, breaking into the room where Valentin and Victor were being held, shooting the guards. Victor manages to run away and Drew escapes with Valentin. And then we see Robert and Anna sneaking around the compound looking for Peter. That's when Valentin and Drew are crossing a bridge and Peter shoots Valentin and then shoots Drew several times, and Drew falls into what I can only imagine is a huge body of water but looks like a little pool that barely fit Drew and the cameraman. Not long after that, the show reveals that Drew was still being conditioned by Peter and was under his control. The shooting was fake to make it look like Drew might have drowned so that the WSB would be looking for him instead of Peter. They go into a getaway car and have Liesl in the trunk. I wonder what happened to the woman that was screaming in another cell. Did we forget about her already? Anyway, while all of this was happening, Dante and Sam were kind of being held hostage by the WSB themselves because they didn't want civilians, you know, going into the compound themselves. Luckily for Dante, he happened to know the guard that was supposed to be guarding them, and he looked the other way so that they could go out and investigate themselves. Obviously, by the time Dante and Sam got to the compound, the only person that they managed to find was Victor Cassadine. And Victor does get arrested by the WSB. During this time, Victor reveals to Anna and Robert that he is in fact Valentin's father, not that it makes them treat him any better. Obviously, Victor wants an immunity deal in exchange for giving them Peter's whereabouts. Robert and Valentin are actually in agreement for one that they don't want to give Victor that immunity deal because they think it's a trap. When Jason and Britt finally get to Crate, Dante and Sam fill him in on what's been happening with Liesl and Victor and Drew and everything else in between. And the journey has just begun for Jason and Britt. Look, I'm sure the actors are all having a blast with this storyline, but at this point, I just need Peter to get got. It absolutely boggles my mind that a boob like Peter manages to outmaneuver a bunch of mobsters, the WSB, the Cassadine family, and still can keep going. It makes no sense. It is both ridiculous and unbelievable, making all these legendary characters look like total idiots every time. Ooh, speaking of the Cassadines, back in Port Charles, it is Spencer's day in court. He had refused to take Ava's offer, and when his friends and his girlfriend advise him to plead guilty, he decides to not plead guilty because he's a dumbass. A bitter, bitter dumbass. Luckily for Spencer, he doesn't have to spend another day in jail because Kevin and Laura, who is still off screen, decide to post his bail on the condition that he moves in with them and gets himself a job. That'll be fun to watch. Alright folks, but that's all she wrote. I hope you guys enjoyed the show this week. Let me know what you thought of GH in the comments below. And if you like this video, give it a big old thumbs up, subscribe if you want to, and I will catch you guys this Wednesday for another GH Envy Reacts. Peace out.